It's Friday, February 27th, 2026. You probably woke up this morning to some headlines about the Federal Reserve. They're talking about interest rate cuts again. Normally, that's the signal to celebrate, right? Lower rates should mean cheaper mortgages, easier car loans, and a bit of breathing room in your monthly budget. But here's the problem, and it's the reason your bank account still feels like it's stuck in reverse. While the Fed is stepping on the gas, someone else has their hand on the emergency brake. Let's look at the numbers because they're doing something very strange. The import price index is sitting at 114.22. That's an 18.4% jump in just a few years. While you're hearing about cooling inflation on the news, the cost of every single thing that crosses a border, from the chips in your phone to the beans in your coffee, is quietly screaming higher. We're talking about a $1,300 annual leak in the average American household's disposable income. That's $1,300 gone. Not because you're spending more, but because the border trap has officially closed? Here's the deal. We've been told for decades that interest rates are the steering wheel of the economy. If things get too expensive, the Fed raises rates to cool it down. If things slow down, they cut rates to speed it up. But in 2026, that steering wheel has been disconnected from the engine. We are witnessing the birth of a permanent 15% inflation floor that interest rates simply can't touch. Let that sink in for a second. If the world's most powerful central bank is cutting rates and your grocery bill is still climbing, who's actually in charge? The answer isn't in a boardroom in DC. It's at the shipping docks. So how did we get here? This is where the story takes a wild turn into what I call the constitutional shell game. Last year, the Supreme Court stepped in and told the White House they couldn't use emergency powers to keep permanent tariffs in place. They basically said, look, Article 1 says the power to tax belongs to Congress, not the president. It looked like the era of massive trade barriers was over. But instead of backing down, the executive branch pulled a move straight out of a financial heist movie. They stopped calling them tariffs and started calling them balance of payment surcharges. They dusted off an obscure piece of the 1974 Trade Act, Section 122. This allowed them to bypass the court by claiming we have fundamental international payment problems. It's a legal shadow tax. By relabeling the cost, they've managed to push the U.S. effective tariff rate to 19.8%. That is a 633% increase in just 3 years. I know, it sounds like bureaucratic jargon, but this is the part you need to pay attention to. This 10% emergency surcharge is now the new floor. It's a 15% shadow tax on your future that no one actually voted for. Retailers aren't stupid. They see the writing on the wall. They've already started baking this surcharge into the MSRP of every consumer product for 2026 to protect their margins. It's why that new laptop or that appliance you've been eyeing suddenly costs hundreds more than it did last year, regardless of what the Fed does with interest rates. The legal hallucination has become your economic reality. But in this game of constitutional chicken, someone is quietly making a fortune off the chaos. Now, let's follow the money. When you see a massive structural shift like this, you have to ask, who wins? While the middle class is paying the border trap tax, a specific group of players is having the best year of their lives. I'm talking about the metals arbitrageurs. If you haven't looked at the price of silver or copper lately, you might want to sit down. Silver is trading at $76.25 an ounce. That's a 163% jump. Copper, it's over $12,000 a ton. Now, you might be thinking, I don't buy silver bars. Why does this matter to me? Here's why. Because of these 15% surcharges on finished goods, companies have stopped importing completed products. Instead, they're rushing to assemble everything locally to avoid the border trap. But to build things here, especially AI data centers and 5G infrastructure, you need raw materials, massive amounts of them. We're seeing a strategic hoarding of industrial-grade metals that is driving prices into the stratosphere. This is the localized assembly trend in action. It's creating an artificial surge in demand for silver and copper that has nothing to do with a booming economy and everything to do with front-running the deglobalization trend. The wholesalers who saw this coming 2 years ago are sitting on mountains of blue gold while you're paying the 15% markup on the finished product. It's a brilliant strategy for the few. But for the rest of us, it's a repeat of an old economic nightmare. Is this a genius move to rebuild American industry? Or are we just watching the math stop working? To understand where this ends, we have to look back to 1971. Some of you might remember the Nixon shock back then. President Nixon imposed a temporary 10% import surcharge to force Japan and Germany to revalue their currencies. It was a tactical play. It lasted 4 months. It was a bluff designed to end the gold standard and reset the global board. But what we're seeing in 2026, this isn't a 4-month bluff. This is a structural bunker. In 1971, the goal was to get back to the negotiating table. In 2026, the goal seems to be to burn the table down. We've got a massive debate raging between the heavyweights. On one side, you have guys like Robert Lighthizer arguing that these tariffs are the only tool left to protect American labor, a protective shield for the worker. On the other side, Larry Summers is calling this a shadow tax on the middle class, arguing that you're effectively taxing every dollar spent on electronics just to fund a constitutional crisis. The Cato Institute is even calling the use of Section 122 a legal hallucination that creates so much market uncertainty that savings become useless. Here's the reality. Our goods trade deficit is still sitting at $1.2 trillion. The tariffs haven't actually fixed the deficit. They've just changed the price tag on it. History tells us how these shocks start, but in 2026, the finish line has been moved entirely. We aren't just in a trade war. We are in a decoupling that is permanent, expensive, and completely immune to traditional monetary policy. So, what's the new normal? Here's the map for the rest of 2026. That 15% price floor, it's not going away. It's now baked into the DNA of the economy. Global trade growth has slowed to just 2.1%. That's a 52% drop in growth in just 3 years. The world is getting smaller, and everything inside your borders is getting more expensive.
The border trap means that for the first time in modern history, your cost of living is being dictated by a tariff man, not a central banker.
Think about that next time you see your grocery bill or look at the price of a new car. We've entered an era where interest rates no longer control your purchasing power. We've decoupled. The Fed can cut rates to 0, but they can't make a 20% surcharge on imported components disappear. This is the structural shift of our generation. The border isn't just a line on a map anymore. It's a 15% surcharge on your future, and the Fed is officially powerless to stop it. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If the tools we've used for 50 years to manage our money are now broken, and the cost of everything is being decided by a legal loophole, what is your plan for a world where inflation has a permanent 15% floor? Because the math doesn't lie, and right now, the math says the old rules are dead. Thanks for the company this morning. Look at the data, watch the metals, and stay ahead of the trap. I'll see you at the next bell.